The dust of the Zargal Pass tasted of iron and finality. It coated the tongue, gritted in the teeth, and settled in a fine, rust-colored film on every surface of forward operating base Kestrel. When Specialist Anya Sharma stepped off the SH-47, the rotor wash kicked up a blinding shroud of it, a gritty welcome to the roof of the world. The other disembarking soldiers, replacements for a unit that had seen hard fighting, coughed and shielded their eyes. Anya simply stood still, her pack settled on her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the brutalist geometry of HESCO barriers and corrugated metal that constituted her new home. She was not tall, nor was she built like the female infantry soldiers who had begun to filter into line units, all broad shoulders and corded muscle. Anya was of an average height with a wiry, almost slight frame that seemed better suited to a marathon runner than a soldier assigned to a reconnaissance platoon in the most contested sector of the province. Her apparent normalcy was the first thing they noticed. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne, the platoon sergeant, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw a granite block of disapproval. His eyes, narrowed against the sun and a lifetime of skepticism, raked over her from boots to the neat bun of black hair tucked under her helmet. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a liability. He saw a quota. "This is her." Thorne's voice was a low growl, directed at the young lieutenant standing beside him. "Sharma? What's her MOS? Admin clerk? Cook?" Corporal Gator Davies, Thorne's most sycophantic protégé, snickered. "Maybe she's here to boost morale, Sarge. A pretty face to look at before we go on patrol." The half-dozen soldiers of First Squad, Thorne's squad, chuckled along with him. They were hard men, their faces etched with the fatigue and tension of constant exposure to danger. They saw Anya's clean, unscarred face and her quiet, unassuming posture, and they judged her instantly. She was a REMF, a rear echelon mother, sent to the tip of the spear by some desk-bound colonel who didn't understand the realities of the ground. Anya heard them. She didn't react. Her expression remained neutral, her dark eyes unreadable. She walked toward the group, her boots crunching on the gravel with a steady, unhurried rhythm. She stopped a respectful distance from Thorne and the lieutenant, her gaze meeting the sergeant's for a brief, unwavering moment before shifting to the officer. "Specialist Sharma, reporting for duty, Lieutenant," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and devoid of inflection. Lieutenant Miller, fresh from West Point and perpetually intimidated by Thorne, cleared his throat. "At ease, Specialist. Welcome to FOB Kestrel. This is Sergeant First Class Thorne. He's your platoon sergeant." Thorne didn't offer a hand. He just grunted, his eyes still passing judgment. "Your file says you're cross-trained in signals intelligence. We don't do a lot of that out here, Specialist. We walk, we watch, and we fight. You better be able to keep up." "I'll keep up, Sergeant," Anya replied, her tone still unervingly placid. "We'll see about that," Thorne scoffed. He turned to Gator. "Davies, show our new specialist where to stow her gear. Bunk her with the supply clerks. She'll be more comfortable there." The insult was plain. Bunking her away from the platoon was a clear act of ostracism. It declared to everyone on the FOB that she was not one of them. Gator gave a theatrical, mocking bow. "This way, ma'am. Watch your step. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." Anya adjusted the pack on her shoulders. It was a standard-issue pack, but it seemed to weigh more on her than it did on the others, a perception her detractors readily embraced. As she followed Gator toward the drab, sand-colored tent, she felt the collective weight of their dismissal. It was a familiar pressure, one she had felt before in different places under different circumstances. It was not pleasant, but it was predictable. Men like Thorne and Gator saw the world through a narrow, rigid lens. They saw her gender, her size, and her quietness, and they drew their conclusions. They didn't see the stillness in her hands. They didn't see the calculus in her eyes as she scanned the perimeter defenses, noting the fields of fire from the guard towers, the placement of the claymores, the blind spots behind the fuel depot. They saw a woman they believed was too soft for combat. They had no idea what was standing in front of them. She passed the makeshift mess hall, the sounds of clanking trays and loud male laughter spilling out. No one looked up to welcome her. They just saw a shadow passing, already forgotten, already dismissed. This was how it always began. The next morning, the dismissal was codified into a formal training exercise. Captain Eva Rostova, the company commander, believed in constant readiness. She was a stern, by-the-book officer who trusted her senior NCOs implicitly. When Sergeant Thorne had approached her after morning formation, his voice a low, concerned rumble, she had listened. "Ma'am, about the new replacement, Sharma," he'd begun. "I don't think she has the physical conditioning for our patrol tempo. I've reviewed her file. She spent most of her career behind a desk. Pushing her into a full combat load on a 12-hour patrol in this altitude could be a liability. To her, and to the men." Rostova's brow furrowed. "What do you recommend, Sergeant?" "A diagnostic. A simple field test. Full kit, stress inoculation. We need to know her baseline. See where she breaks." The last words were spoken with a hint of grim satisfaction. And so, Anya found herself on the FOB's makeshift training range, a dusty expanse of dirt and rock surrounded by HESCO walls. The entire platoon was present, ostensibly to run through their own drills, but in reality, they were spectators. It was an arena, and she was the morning's entertainment. Thorne stood before her, a clipboard in hand, though he never looked at it. "All right, Sharma. Simple drill. You're going to run the perimeter. For laps. Full kit." He gestured to the pack at her feet. A pack she'd seen Gator and another soldier, a hulking man named Rhino, stuffing with extra sandbags from the maintenance shed. It had to weigh over 100 pounds. After each lap, you'll perform a function check on your weapon, do 20 push-ups, and recite the 9-line medevac request. "Any questions?" Anya looked at the impossibly heavy pack, then at Thorne's smug face. "No, Sergeant." "Good. Begin." She hefted the pack, the weight settling onto her hips and shoulders with a crushing force. Her knees buckled slightly, a small movement that drew a fresh round of snickers from Gator's corner. She ignored them. She locked her core, found her center of gravity, and began to jog. It wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, steady, metronomic pace. The first lap was agony. The thin air burned in her lungs. The straps of the pack dug into her shoulders, and the immense weight tried to pull her backward with every step. The sun was relentless. The other soldiers went through the motions of their own training, but their eyes were on her. They were waiting for her to stumble, to quit, to prove them right. She finished the first lap, her face pale but her expression unchanged. She dropped to the ground, performed 20 perfect push-ups, her back ramrod straight. She reassembled her rifle after a field strip, her movements economical and precise. Then, breathing heavily but with her voice steady, she recited the 9-line request. Thorne's smirk tightened. He hadn't expected her to complete the first lap. 1 down, 3 to go. Move it. The second lap was worse. Her legs screamed. The world narrowed to the path concentriceo her feet, the burning in her muscles, the rasp of her own breathing. But she kept on. She finished the lap. 20 more push-ups, slower this time, but still perfect form. Weapon check. 9-line. Her voice now a strained whisper. By the third lap, the amusement in the crowd had turned to a kind of grudging fascination. She was stumbling now, her pace reduced to a shuffling walk. Her uniform was soaked through with sweat, but she hadn't stopped. She was operating on something beyond muscle, something they didn't recognize. When she finished the third lap, she collapsed to her knees. She tried to start her push-ups, but her arms gave way. "That's enough, Sergeant," Captain Rostova said, her voice sharp. She had been watching from the command tent, her expression unreadable. Thorne ignored her. This was his show. He walked over to Anya, looming over her kneeling form. "Get up, specialist. I didn't say you were done." Anya pushed herself up, her body trembling with exhaustion. She stood, swaying slightly, her head bowed. Thorne stepped into her personal space, his face inches from hers. His voice dropped to a venomous, personal whisper. "You see? This is what I'm talking about. You don't have it. You're soft. You're a liability. People like you get good soldiers killed because you can't hack it when things get real. You should have stayed behind your desk, little girl." He punctuated the insult by shoving her hard in the shoulder. Anya stumbled back a step. She lifted her head, and for the first time, her eyes held a flicker of something other than placid neutrality. It was a cold, hard light. "Do not put your hands on me again, Sergeant." Her voice was dangerously quiet. Thorne laughed. A loud, ugly sound. The entire platoon went silent, watching. "Or what? You'll cry to the captain? You'll file a report." He shoved her again, harder this time. "What are you going to do, specialist? What are you going to?" He never finished the sentence. The movement was a blur, an explosion of speed and precision that no one could follow. It wasn't a punch. It was a sequence. Anya's left hand shot up, deflecting his shoving arm, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. Simultaneously, she pivoted on her left foot, stepping inside his guard. Her right hand, formed into a rigid blade, struck the side of his neck, targeting the vagus nerve and carotid sinus. Her body flowed like water, using his own forward momentum against him. As his eyes widened in shock and his body went limp, she completed the pivot, her hip driving into his, breaking his balance completely. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne, a man who outweighed her by 80 pounds and had 2 decades of combat experience, dropped to the dust like a sack of stones. He wasn't just on the ground. He was unconscious. His eyes were rolled back in his head. He had been switched off. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the training yard. Gator's jaw hung open. The other soldiers stared, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. It hadn't been a fight. It was a disassembly. It was the most clinical, efficient, and terrifying takedown any of them had ever seen. Anya stood over him, her breathing still ragged from the run, but her stance perfectly balanced. She looked down at the unconscious sergeant, then up at the stunned face of Captain Rostova. "I told him not to put his hands on me," Anya said, her voice still quiet, but now it carried a weight that could crush rock. The crisis arrived, as it always did, without fanfare. Came 3 days after the incident on the training field. For those 3 days, Anya was a pariah. Captain Rostova, furious and backed into a corner by regulation and Thorne's public humiliation, had confined Anya to the FOB. She was officially under investigation for striking a senior NCO. Thorne, after being revived by the medic with a bruised neck and an annihilated ego, had refused to speak of it, his silence more damning than any outburst. The platoon, fiercely loyal to their sergeant, treated Anya with a new kind of hostility. The mockery was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. She was no longer just soft. She was dangerous, unstable. They gave her a wide berth, their eyes following her with a mixture of fear and hatred. Anya was assigned to the Tactical Operations Center, the nerve center of the FOB, ostensibly to put her supposed signals intelligence skills to use. In reality, it was a prison. She spent her 12-hour shifts staring at radio consoles and satellite imagery feeds, a ghost in the machine, listening to the routine chatter of patrols she was forbidden to join. On the 3rd day, First Squad went out. With Thorne on light duty, his second-in-command, Sergeant Cole, was in charge. Gator Davies, Rhino, and a quiet, observant specialist named Kenji Tanaka were with them, along with a few others. Their mission was a simple reconnaissance patrol. Ascend the eastern ridge of the Sorna Valley, observe any movement, and return before dusk. Standard procedure. Anya was on the comms console when they called in their first checkpoint. Cole's voice was calm, professional. "Kestrel Actual, this is Reaper 1. Checkpoint Alpha, all clear. Proceeding to Checkpoint Bravo." "Solid copy, Reaper 1, Anya replied, her voice the monotone of a machine. "Kestrel Actual out." For the next hour, there was silence. It was normal. Radio discipline was strict. But as the scheduled time for their next check-in came and went, a knot of unease began to form in Anya's stomach. She glanced at the clock. 5 minutes late. Not unheard of. Atmospheric interference. Difficult terrain. 10 minutes. The knot tightened. Captain Rostova entered the TOC, a mug of coffee in her hand. Anything from Reaper 1? Negative, ma'am. They're 10 minutes past their scheduled report from Checkpoint Bravo. Rostova's expression didn't change, but her eyes became more focused. Try to raise them. Anya keyed the microphone. Reaper 1. This is Kestrel Actual. Radio check. Over. Static. She tried again, switching to an alternate frequency. Reaper 1. This is Kestrel Actual. How copy? Over. More static. Then, a burst of noise. A sound like a tearing sheet of metal. Gunfire. Not the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of the squad's M4S, but the guttural, high-rate chatter of enemy machine guns. It was overlaid with shouting, panicked and incoherent. Contact! Contact! Ambush from the Get Down! Grenade! The voice, distorted and terrified, was Gator Davies. Then, Sergeant Cole's voice, strained and breathless. Kestrel Actual, this is Reaper. We are in a complex ambush. Multiple positions, heavy machine gun, ridge line coordinates. His transmission was cut off by a deafening roar, an explosion that made the speaker on Anya's console crackle and hiss. Then, nothing. Just the flat, dead hum of empty air. Reaper 1, this is Kestrel Actual. Come in. Anya's voice was sharp, urgent. Silence. Reaper 1, I say again, what is your status? Silence. Rostova was at her side, her face a mask of grim concern. Get the quick reaction force spun up. I want air assets on station yesterday. Give me their last known position. The operations officer began barking orders into his own handset. The TOC, moments before a place of quiet routine, became a hive of controlled chaos. Maps were unfurled, coordinates plotted. But the information was incomplete. Complex ambush was all they had. That could mean anything. The enemy could be a fire team or a platoon. The Sorna Valley was a maze of dead-end ravines, false ridges, and hidden caves. Sending a rescue force in blind was a recipe for a second disaster. Anya wasn't looking at the maps. She was listening to the ghost of the transmission. She closed her eyes, replaying the sounds in her head. The specific cadence of the machine gun fire. The type of explosion, not a standard RPG, the acoustic signature was different, lower, more concussive. The way Cole's voice was cut off. It wasn't a pattern she had read about in an intelligence brief. It was a pattern she had heard before, a lifetime ago, in a place very different from this. It was a signature. A highly specific, brutally effective trapping methodology used by a very particular group of insurgent fighters, specialists themselves. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Reaper 1 hadn't just stumbled into a random insurgent position. They had been deliberately channeled into a prepared killing ground. And if she was right, the QRF, following standard doctrine, would be channeled into a secondary kill zone set up specifically to destroy them. She stood up. Her movement was so abrupt it caught Rostova's attention. Specialist, what is it? Did you get something? Anya looked at the captain, her eyes burning with an intensity Rostova had never seen. Ma'am, call off the QRF's current approach vector. They are flying into a trap. The ops officer paused, his handset halfway to his mouth. On what authority, Specialist? The enemy isn't where you think they are, Anya said, her voice low and rapid. She moved to the large satellite map of the valley, her finger tracing a path the patrol had taken. Reaper 1 wasn't ambushed at Checkpoint Bravo. They were allowed to pass it. The enemy let them walk a kilometer further, deeper into the box. The attack came from here. She tapped a narrow ravine branching off the main ridge, a Spakan Bujanda from the FOB and with no direct line of sight. It's a classic L ambush, but with a false front. The initial fire from the ridge was a feint, designed to pin them and make them seek cover here. Her finger moved to a small, rocky depression. That depression is zeroed in by mortars. The explosion we heard wasn't an RPG. It was a pre-sighted 82mm round. They're being bracketed. Rostova stared at her, then at the map. That's speculation, Sharma. You can't possibly know that. The machine gun we heard was a DSHK, but it was being fired in controlled, 5-round bursts to conserve ammunition and disguise their numbers. The operator is disciplined. They aren't local militia, Anya continued, her voice gaining speed and conviction. They're professionals, and their doctrine dictates a secondary ambush always. The most likely QRF landing zone is this plateau here. It offers good cover from the ridge, which is why they will have a manpads team waiting in this declivity, overlooking it. They will let the helicopters land, let the troops disembark, and then they will hit the aircraft and the soldiers on the ground simultaneously. Anya's certainty was absolute, terrifying. She wasn't guessing. She was stating facts. Rostova was frozen, caught between the rigid certainty of military doctrine and the chilling, inexplicable authority in Anya's voice. Every second she hesitated could mean more dead soldiers. "Get me a new asset," Anya demanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. She was no longer a specialist. She was something else entirely. A light vehicle, something fast. And I need one man. Specialist Tanaka. He's a former scout/sniper, he'll know how to move. The rest of the QRF needs to hold back, circle at high altitude, and wait for my signal. I can get to them. But we have to go now. Captain Rostova looked at the chaos of her TOC, at the faces of her staff staring at Anya in disbelief. She looked at the map, at the red circle marking the location of her missing men. Her career, her command, and the lives of her soldiers rested on this moment. She could follow the book and likely lose everyone. Or she could trust the disgraced, soft specialist who had taken down her best NCO with a single silent move. "Do it," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper, then louder so the whole TOC could hear. "Do what she says. Now." The FOB's motor pool had one vehicle that fit Anya's request. A stripped-down, lightweight MRAP, designed for speed and maneuverability over raw firepower. As mechanics frantically checked its fluids, Anya moved with a purpose that was hypnotic to watch. She didn't go to the general arms room. She went to her own bunk, to a single hard-shelled Pelican case she had kept locked under her cot. She opened it, and the contents silenced the 2 supply clerks who shared her tent. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a standard-issue M4. It was a heavily modified Honey Badger PDW, a compact, integrally suppressed weapon system chambered in 300 blackout. Next to it were magazines loaded with subsonic ammunition, a suite of advanced optics, and a compact chest rig that was leaner and more efficient than anything in the Army's inventory. It was the personal kit of a professional, curated over years of brutal experience. Specialist Tanaka was waiting for her by the vehicle, his face a stony mask of apprehension. He'd been pulled from his maintenance duties and simply told, "Sharma needs you." He had watched her take down Thorn. He didn't know what to think, but he knew she was not what she seemed. He carried his own M110 sniper system, his expression grim. Anya threw her gear in the back and climbed into the driver's seat. She didn't speak. She just looked at him. Tanaka got in. As she fired up the engine, its diesel roar shattering the FOB's tense quiet, Captain Rostova ran up to the window. "Sharma, your radio is tied directly to my console. No one else. You talk only to me. What's your plan?" Anya's hands moved over the controls, her gaze already fixed on the pass leading out of the FOB. "The enemy expects you to come from the sky or up the main valley. They won't be looking for a 2-man team coming from the west, through the Goat's Run. It's considered impassable by vehicle." "It is impassable," Rostova shot back. "It's a damn rockslide. It's passable if you know the route," Anya said, and her voice was so calm, so certain, that it was more convincing than any shouted argument. She engaged the clutch and the vehicle lurched forward. "I know the route." The Goat's Run was less a path and more a geological nightmare. It was a narrow, treacherous track littered with boulders the size of engines and switchbacks so tight the vehicle's front bumper seemed to hang over sheer, 1,000-foot drops. Anya drove not with reckless speed, but with a terrifying precision. Her hands on the wheel were steady, making thousands of micro-corrections, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead, picking a line that seemed impossible. Tanaka sat gripping his rifle, his knuckles white, his scout/sniper training screaming at him that this was suicide. He had patrolled these mountains for 6 months. No one drove the goat's run. Anya handled the vehicle like an extension of her own body. She used the throttle to pivot the rear end around rocks, feathered the brakes to crawl down scree slopes that should have sent them tumbling, and seemed to feel the terrain through the tires. She was utterly focused, a study in absolute concentration. After 20 minutes of heart-stopping driving, she brought the vehicle to a halt in a small, hidden alcove of rock, completely concealed from the air and the surrounding ridges. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks. "We're here," she said, her voice a low whisper. "Grab your gear. We go on foot from here." She moved out of the vehicle, her honey badger already in her hands, the suppressor giving it a deadly, compact profile. She didn't wait for Tanaka. She began to climb, moving up the rock face with the speed and silence of a leopard. Her movements were fluid, efficient, never wasting a single motion. She didn't dislodge a single pebble. Tanaka, a man who prided himself on his fieldcraft, had to struggle to keep up. They crested a small rise, and Anya dropped flat, pulling Tanaka down beside her. She unslung a small, powerful monocular from her vest. Below them, spread out like a tableau of death, was the ambush site. It was exactly as she had described. The remnants of First Squad were pinned down in a shallow, rocky depression. 2 soldiers were already down, unmoving. The others, including a visibly wounded Sergeant Cole, were returning sporadic, panicked fire at the main ridgeline, the feint. Gator Davies was frantically trying to work his radio, his face a mask of terror. They were trapped. Anya didn't look at the pinned-down squad. Her eyes, aided by the monocular, were scanning the other positions. "There," she whispered, her voice colder than the mountain air. "Mortar. 2-man team. 500 meters. Azimuth 290". She handed the monocular to Tanaka. Tanaka put it to his eye and focused. He saw them, 2 figures, partially concealed in a nest of rocks, swabbing out the tube of an 82mm mortar. They were calm, professional, preparing for their next shot. His blood ran cold. Anya had called it. She had called it exactly. "And there," Anya said, pointing with her chin to a different spot, a shadowed notch of rock high on the ridge overlooking the entire basin. "Machine gun. DSHK. 3-man team. They're the linchpin. They have interlocking fields of fire covering every escape route." Tanaka found them, too. The heavy barrel of the Russian machine gun was just visible, its crew waiting patiently. "The Manpad's team will be on the reverse slope watching the QRF approach vector," Anya stated, not as a theory but as a fact. "They won't engage until the helos are on the ground. It's too valuable an asset to waste on a high-altitude pass." Tanaka lowered the monocular, his breath catching in his chest. He looked at Anya, at her calm, focused profile. This wasn't intelligence analysis. This was first-hand knowledge. She knew their playbook because she had faced it before. "What's the plan?" Tanaka asked, his voice now stripped of all previous skepticism. He wasn't talking to a specialist anymore. He was talking to his only chance of survival. Anya's eyes were still scanning, calculating. "They're patient. They'll bleed them, draw them out. They want the rescue force. That's the real prize. So we use their patience against them. The mortar team is your priority. They control the pace of this fight. Can you make the shot?" Tanaka looked at the distance, calculated the wind, which was swirling unpredictably in the valley. It was a difficult shot, 500 meters with a crosswind. But it was possible. "I can make the shot." "You get one," Anya said, her voice like ice. "You fire, the DSHK will immediately suppress your position. You will have seconds to move before they walk rounds all over this ledge. While they're focused on you, I'll be moving. I'm going to take out the DSHK." Tanaka stared at her. "You? Alone? That's a 3-man heavy weapons team in a fortified position." Anya finally looked at him. Her eyes were devoid of fear, of doubt, of anything but lethal purpose. They're overconfident. They're watching the valley floor. They're not looking for someone coming up the cliff face behind them. Take out the mortar. I'll handle the rest. Without another word, she was gone. She didn't run. She flowed down the back of the rise, disappearing into the shadows and rocks like smoke. Tanaka was left alone, the weight of the entire operation now resting on his one shot. He settled behind his rifle, deployed the bipod, and began to control his breathing. He had one shot, and Anya was moving. Anya moved in a way that defied conventional military training. She didn't use the established routes or follow the contours of the land. She moved against them, using a discipline of stealth that was part animal, part ghost. She scaled a near-vertical rock chimney that soldiers would have required ropes and harnesses to ascend, her fingers and toes finding purchase in tiny cracks, her suppressed weapon slung tight against her back. She moved through patches of thorny scrub without making a sound, her body low, her senses alive to every nuance of her environment. The direction of the wind, the cry of a distant bird, the loose shale underfoot. Her destination was the fortified machine gun nest. The DSHK, a brutal Soviet-era weapon, was the anchor of the enemy's position. It commanded the battlefield, its heavy 127mm rounds capable of tearing through the rock cover the squad was hiding behind. From her analysis, the three-man team was professional, but their arrogance was their weakness. They were the kings of the hill, and they believed no threat could come from their rear, from the sheer, unforgiving cliffs. As she climbed, the sound of a single, heavy rifle shot echoed through the valley. A sharp, distinct crack-whump. Tanaka's shot. She didn't need to see it to know he had been successful. The sudden, panicked shouts from the enemy fighters in the valley below, now unprintable on the comms, confirmed it. The mortars had gone silent. Almost immediately, the DSHK opened up not at first squad, but at the ledge where Tanaka had fired from. The air was torn apart by the weapon's deafening roar, a sound like a jackhammer on God's anvil. Anya watched as huge chunks of rock were pulverized where Tanaka had been lying only seconds before. She hoped he had been fast enough to move. But the DSHK crew was now distracted. All their attention, all their fury, was directed at a sniper they couldn't see. This was her window. She was less than 50 meters from them now, hidden in a cleft of rock just below their position. She could hear their voices, harsh and guttural, shouting orders. She unslung her honey badger. The weapon felt light, perfectly balanced in her hands. She checked the chamber, her movements fluid and economical. She wasn't breathing heavily, despite the arduous climb. Her heart rate was steady, her mind a cold, clear lake of tactical calculus. She moved from her cover, a wraith in the mountain's shadow. The gunner was focused on his sights, firing another long burst. The assistant gunner was feeding a belt of ammunition. The team leader was standing just behind them, binoculars to his eyes, trying to spot Tanaka's new position. None of them saw her. 3 shots. That's all it took. 3 quiet, precise pfts from the suppressed weapon, barely audible over the wind and the echo of the DSHK. They were not shots to the chest or head. They were neurologically precise, aimed at the brainstem, instant and absolute. The team leader dropped first, his binoculars clattering on the rocks. The assistant gunner slumped over the ammo can. The gunner himself just went limp, his hands falling away from the DSHK, his head lolling to one side. The monstrous gun fell silent. The sudden, shocking silence on the ridge was more profound than the noise had been. Down in the depression, First Squad felt the change instantly. The oppressive, soul-shaking thunder of the heavy machine gun was gone. Sergeant Cole, holding a bloody field dressing to his leg, looked up. What happened? Where's the DSHK? Gator Davies, huddled behind a rock, risked a glance. I don't know, Sarge. It just stopped. It was then that a figure appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the sky. It was Anya. She stood by the silent machine gun, her small frame a stark contrast to the massive weapon. She raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a clear, recognized military signal. All clear. Back in the TOC, Captain Rostova watched the drone feed in stunned silence. The drone had just arrived on station, its camera zooming in on the DSHK position. It had captured the entire event. It had recorded Anya's ghost-like approach and the 3 silent, clinically executed takedowns. The ops officer next to her was pale. "My God," he whispered. "Who is she?" Rostova didn't answer. She was already on her terminal, entering her command-level credentials. She typed in Anya Sharma's service number and requested her full and censored file. Access was denied. She escalated the request, citing imminent operational necessity, overriding the standard protocols. An encrypted warning flashed on her screen. For eyes of 06 and above only. Violators subject to prosecution under UCMJ. She ignored it and hit enter. The file that loaded was 90% black. Thick, dark redaction bars covered almost every line. Mission locations, unit designations, commendations, all gone. But 2 words, left unredacted, glowed on the screen. A project name, Chimera, and below it, a call sign, Kestrel. Rostova's blood ran cold. Kestrel. It wasn't just a name. It was a ghost story, a legend whispered in hushed tones at secured briefing rooms and late-night gatherings of special operations personnel. Kestrel was a solo operator, a specialist in deep infiltration, sabotage, and asymmetrical warfare. A phantom credited with dozens of impossible, unattributed successes in the darkest corners of the globe. No one knew if Kestrel was a man or a woman, or even a single person. They were a myth that had just single-handedly dismantled a professional ambush in her sector. The FOB's name, Kestrel, was a coincidence, a cruel irony that was not lost on Rostova. On the battlefield, a similar revelation was dawning. As Anya made her way down to the beleaguered squad, Tanaka rejoined her, appearing silently from the rocks, his rifle slung. He had seen what she did through his scope. His face was a mask of awe. When they reached the squad, the surviving soldiers stared at her as if she were an apparition. Gator Davies, his face streaked with dirt and tears, looked at her weapon, then at her. He saw the way she moved, the utter lack of wasted motion, the cold calm in her eyes. His mind, struggling to reconcile the woman he'd mocked with the operator who had just saved them, snagged on a detail. He'd seen her once in the mess tent, her glove slipping for a moment as she picked up a tray. On the inside of her wrist, he'd seen a tattoo. At the time, he thought it was just some meaningless design. Now, the image came back to him with stunning clarity. A stylized bird of prey, its wings folded, clutching a single silent arrow. He'd seen that same tattoo on a grizzled Delta Force operator who had passed through their base months ago. A man who spoke in whispers of legends. A man who had told a story about an operative called Kestrel. Gator looked from Anya's calm face to the silent DSHK on the ridge, and his world tilted on its axis. "It's you," he breathed, the words barely audible. "You're her." Anya's gaze swept over him, then to the wounded. She didn't acknowledge his words. "Tanaka set up Overwatch on that western pass. They have one escape route left. Cole, give me a casualty report. Now." Her voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through their shock. They weren't her peers. They were her responsibility. And the mission wasn't over. The fight wasn't over, but its nature had fundamentally changed. The enemy, deprived of their heavy weapons and their command structure, was now the one caught in a trap. Anya's quiet, precise commands transformed the panicked remnants of First Squad into a functional, lethal unit. She didn't shout or motivate. She directed. "Rhino, you and Jean suppress that rock formation, 2 o'clock. Use controlled bursts. I want their heads down," she ordered, her voice a low, calm current in the storm of their residual fear. "Gator, your radio. Get me a secure channel to Kestrel Actual. Use encryption set Bravo 7. Tell her Reaper 1 is secure, but we are not static. We are breaking contact to the west." Gator, who moments before had been paralyzed by terror, fumbled with his radio, his hands shaking. The name Kestrel Actual on his lips felt different now, impossibly heavy. He was speaking to a captain, but he was taking orders from a legend. Anya directed their fire, coordinating their movements with the predatory grace of a wolf pack's alpha. She moved from position to position, never staying still, her suppressed weapon spitting subsonic rounds that were barely whispers on the wind. She pointed out targets the terrified soldiers hadn't seen, enemy fighters trying to flank them or fall back to regroup. She saw everything. Her situational awareness was total, three-dimensional. The enemy, used to fighting panicked, by-the-book soldiers, had no answer for this. They were being hunted. Their professional ambush had been turned into a meat grinder by one woman and a handful of soldiers she had molded into extensions of her own will. "Cole," she said, kneeling beside the wounded sergeant. She quickly assessed the field dressing on his leg. It was sloppy, soaked through. "This isn't working." She pulled her own medical kit from her rig. It was compact, but filled with items not found in a standard IFAK. A hemostatic agent, specialized tourniquets. Her hands were sure and steady as she worked, cleaning the wound and applying a new, more effective dressing, cinching it tight. Cole winced, but his eyes were fixed on her face, his expression one of dawning, absolute reverence. "The exfil route they planned for us is a death trap," Anya said, not looking up from her work. "We're not going back the way we came. We're going west, through the Narrows. It will bring us out at the base of the Goat's Run. I have a vehicle staged there." Back at the FOB, Rostova listened to Gator's relayed message. She looked at the map at the route Anya had specified. It was unconventional, dangerous, but it completely avoided the enemy's likely fallback positions. It was brilliant. "Acknowledge," Rostova transmitted, her own voice now imbued with a new respect. "Air assets will hold a high orbit and await your signal. Kestrel actual out." She turned to her dumbfounded staff. "She's not just saving them. She's teaching them." The breakout was a brutal, running gunfight, but it was a fight on Anya's terms. She kept them moving, using fire and maneuver with a proficiency that most soldiers only read about in training manuals. She was the tip of the spear, the first one to round a corner, the first one to engage. By the time they reached the rendezvous point at the base of the cliff, the pursuing fire had died away. The enemy had broken and fled. The light MRAP was where she had left it, a metal beast tucked into the shadows. The squad, exhausted, bloody, and emotionally shattered, piled in. The bodies of their two fallen comrades were loaded with a grim, practiced reverence. The ride back was silent. No one spoke. They just watched Anya drive, her focus as absolute as it had been on the way out. They were seeing the same terrain, the same impossible track, but their perception had been irrevocably altered. This was not a road. It was her road. When the FOB's gates came into view, a wave of relief washed over the men. Medics and a stretcher team were waiting, alerted by Rostova. As the vehicle came to a stop, the rear doors opened and the work of triage began. Sergeant Thorne was there. His neck was still bruised, and he walked with a stiff, guarded posture, his pride as wounded as his body. He had spent the last several hours in the TOC, listening to the comms, watching the drone feed. He had seen it all. The medics carefully lifted Sergeant Cole onto a stretcher. As they carried him past, he looked over at Anya, who was now methodically unloading her gear. "Sharma," he started, his voice rough. "Thank you." Anya just nodded, her attention already on her weapon. Then Thorne stepped forward. He stood before Anya, the entire returning squad watching, the medics pausing in their work. The air was thick with unspoken history, the humiliation on the training field, the mockery, the rescue. Thorne, a man of loud words and rigid beliefs, opened his mouth. But no words came out. His throat worked, but he couldn't form a sentence. Instead, he looked at her. He saw the dust and dried blood on her face, the exhaustion she held at bay through sheer force of will, the lethal efficiency in the way she cleared her honey badger. He saw the woman he had called soft, the liability he had tried to break. And in her, he saw the architect of a miracle. Slowly, deliberately, Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne, A man who hadn't saluted a specialist in 20 years, brought his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It wasn't a salute to her rank. It was a salute to the warrior. An admission, an apology, an act of profound, unconditional respect. Anya paused her work. She looked at him, her dark eyes holding his for a long moment. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. And then she returned to cleaning her weapon. Captain Rostova approached, her stride measured. She stopped beside Thorn. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Anya. The rest of the squad, Gator, Rhino, the others, stood in a loose, protective semicircle, their posture no longer hostile but reverent. They were guarding her, instinctively, from the gawking of the other soldiers now gathering to see the patrols return. "Report, Specialist Sharma," Rostova said. Her voice was formal, crisp, but the use of Anya's rank and surname was not a reprimand. It was a restoration. It was the precise, official language of respect, an acknowledgement of competence and a clean slate. The investigation was over. Anya looked up from her rifle, her gaze meeting the captain's. 2 Kia 1 WIA. Reaper 1 is home, ma'am. The FOB settled into the rhythms of the night. The urgent energy of the crisis dissipated, replaced by a somber quiet. The medevac helicopter had departed, its rotor beats fading into the vast, dark expanse of the Hindu Kush. The names of the 2 fallen soldiers were now just that. Names to be added to a list, their gear to be packed, their families to be notified. The cost of the day was being tallied in quiet, administrative ways. For most of the FOB, the story was already hardening into a simplified legend. First squad got hit, and the new girl, Sharma, the quiet one, somehow managed to save them. The details were murky, exaggerated, or misunderstood. But for the men of First Squad, and for Captain Rostova, the truth was a sharp, indigestible reality. They had been saved not by luck or by a fluke, but by a level of skill they had never before witnessed firsthand. Anya did not go to the mess hall for the evening meal. She did not join the quiet, somber debriefs. After ensuring her weapons were clean enough to pass a surgeon's inspection, she disappeared. No one knew where she went. No one dared to ask. Hours later, long after midnight, Specialist Tanaka found her. He had been unable to sleep, the day's events replaying in his mind. The impossible shot he'd been ordered to take, Anya's spectral movement up the cliff face, the 3 silent puffs of her weapon. He had been a scout/sniper for 6 years before reclassifying, and he knew what it took to operate at that level. It wasn't just training. It was an innate gift, honed by a crucible of experience he couldn't begin to imagine. He found her in the small, generator-lit maintenance bay, a place that smelled of grease and solvent. She was alone, sitting on an overturned crate. Before her, laid out on a clean canvas tarp, were the contents of her Pelican case. She was meticulously repacking her specialized kit. Each magazine was wiped clean, each piece of equipment inspected and placed in its foam cutout with a watchmaker's precision. Her movements were slow, deliberate, ritualistic. It was a private ceremony of order and control in a world of chaos. Tanaka stood in the doorway for a full minute, just watching. He had brewed a mug of the thick, bitter coffee that was the FOB's lifeblood. He had intended to say something, to thank her, to ask her what, how, who are you? But seeing her there, in her bubble of intense, quiet focus, he knew that words were the wrong tool. They were clumsy, inadequate. He walked into the bay, his boots making soft sounds on the concrete floor. Anya didn't look up, but her hands paused for a fraction of a second. She knew he was there. He approached the workbench next to her and gently placed the hot mug down. The ceramic made a soft clink against the wood. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, a silent sentinel. Then he gave a single formal nod, a gesture of respect deeper than any words he could have offered. He turned and walked away, leaving her to her ritual. Anya's hands resumed their work. She picked up a small, powerful thermal monocular, wiped the lens with a soft cloth, and settled it into its place. She did not look at the coffee mug, but she could feel its warmth radiating into the cool night air. It was an offering, an acknowledgement, an acceptance. She finished her packing as the first hint of dawn began to bleed over the jagged peaks to the east. The sky turned from inky black to a deep, bruised purple, then to a pale, cold gray. The light crept down the mountainsides, slowly revealing the raw, brutal beauty of the landscape. It was the same view she had seen upon her arrival, but it felt different now. The land had tested her, and she had passed. The men had tested her, and they had been found wanting, then been redeemed. She clicked the final latch on her pelican case, the sound sharp and final in the quiet of the coming morning. She stood, stretched her back, and picked up the mug of coffee. It was still warm. She took a slow sip, the bitter liquid a familiar comfort. She looked out the open bay door at the rising sun, at the light chasing the shadows from the valleys. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She had earned their respect. She hadn't wanted it, hadn't asked for it, but it was hers now, a heavy and silent mantle. The day was new, the war was not, and Kestrel was ready.